Brian Flores, he is actually filing a lawsuit against the NFL. You look at this lawsuit that he's filing, it's a class action lawsuit, which means you can bring other people in. It is against the Broncos, the Giants, the Dolphins, and the NFL for racist hiring practices. First, Greg, your initial reaction when you saw this news come across yesterday?
Yeah, it was it was so stunning that so what happened was I was on Felger and Maz at the time when I'm looking at my Twitter account and I saw Jim Murray retweeted some reporter, and it was the first instance that I had heard about it, and I was like, and I took a look at it real quick. Again, we were live on air at the time, and I'm skimming through it, and look, it's Twitter. I don't know. I've made mistakes before where I've retweeted things and being mistaken, and this was kind of a big deal. So I asked the guy, I was like, "Is this real?" And then quickly it became clear and confirmed that it was indeed real. And a couple of things, Nick, that sort of stand out about this to me. Number one, it's a historic sort of lawsuit for an active coach in the National Football League to bring something like this forward, especially a young, talented black head coach like Brian Flores. So the guts that it takes to do something like this are just, they're huge. And it doesn't surprise me that it's Brian Flores who would do something like this. It would, he's a guy I covered with the Patriots, a guy I've kept in touch with. I have an immense respect for Brian Flores in terms of the type of coach that he is, type of person that he is, more importantly. That being said, I question the timing on this a lot, Nick. Look, there's still 5 more openings in this league that he's already interviewed twice with the Houston Texans. He was set to interview with the New Orleans Saints today. And for him to all of a sudden come forth with a lawsuit like this, I don't understand it. He could have gotten a job. I don't know why it would have made a difference if he waited 2 weeks or a month to file this suit if he didn't get a head coaching job and he felt like he was indeed wronged. I don't understand that part of it. And look, he knows the risks that come with doing this. He's talked about it. I just watched the interview that he gave on CBS this morning, which I thought was a little curious. I'm a little bit worried about the lawyers involved in this and their angle in all this. But Colin Kaepernick comes to mind. He's a guy who spoke out against systemic racism in this country, police brutality, never played again in the league. Brian Flores bringing this forth against the entire National Football League and also all of its teams, certainly risks being employed by the NFL again. He understands that. This is a class action lawsuit, so obviously there is some belief on Flores' part or on his attorney's part that he will be joined at some point by other people in the class, other minority coaches who think they have been wronged and may or may not have receipts or proof. I think that, and we can go in a bunch of different directions. I think that the Bill Belichick text messages that he used is sort of the smoking gun. I don't know, kind of flimsy to me. I understand what is being said there, that the allegation is Bill Belichick got Brian Daboll and Brian Flores mixed up and basically was saying, well, I've heard from the Bills and the Giants that it's a done deal, that Brian Daboll is getting the job even before Flores interviews. But Belichick could also explain that away. He could say, look, I'm 70 years old. Sometimes I get things mixed up. And also, I didn't really hear from those teams. I was going off of media reports and the fact that the Giants had hired a Bills GM. I was just connecting dots. I didn't really know what was going on at the time. So those are some of my, lead off thoughts on this. But, I think the big thing for me is Brian, like I said, I have a ton of respect for Brian. Part of his weaknesses to me is, first of all, he didn't lose his job in Miami because he was a black head coach or he defied what Stephen Ross wanted as far as throwing games and things like that, even though that might have factored into it. He lost his job because he decided to work for a crappy owner, for a crappy organization. At the time, I said he should not take that job. He had only been defensive coordinator of the Patriots for 1 year. Better jobs with better organizations, with better owners, with a better track record would have come calling for Brian Flores. And he put himself in that position to do well and to still get fired. We all knew that was a possibility went down there. He knew that was a possibility. But the biggest thing is when you launch something like this, you have to have an end game in mind. I don't know what the end game is, Nick. And listening to that interview today on CBS this morning, I don't think they know what the end game is, which makes me nervous for Brian. Like you're basically doing it because the NFL is not going to want to get to discovery. They're not going to want Bill Belichick's not going to have to hand over his phone and emails and a bunch of other executives in this league. This is why Colin Kaepernick, that league settled with Colin Kaepernick before they got to discovery. The NFL is not going to do that. They're not going to turn over all these emails and cell phones. So it's either a monetary settlement or you dictate the terms of the settlement in terms of helping minority coaches in the future. And this is the big thing. I don't understand what they want. What exactly is the NFL going to be able to do to help minority hiring that's going to satisfy Flores and the quote-unquote class in this? I don't understand the end game. I don't see a clear end game. Brian Flores better have a clear end game in mind, or else this is a fruitless lawsuit in my mind.
All right, there's a lot to unpack. You just gave me about 6 minutes of a lot of info. The first thing I will say is why now, when you still had maybe 4 or 5 weeks, you could have had one of these 5 remaining jobs. I would just say my guess is guilt on Flores' part. And what I mean by that is this was something where he thought that he couldn't live with any longer. Like he needed to bring this up, as he has said in his statement, and he has said in a bunch of interviews. I mean, he was on CBS, he was on Get Up this morning on ESPN, he was on CNN. They are absolutely pushing the PR on this, which they should, because they know how much of a powerful entity the NFL is. You've got to get your side of the story out and your message out before they start sending their message out, which we know will come. And when it does get here, I think it's going to be ferocious if history is any indication. So I would say it's probably just guilt. Even if Flores got a job, he's probably looking back at this and said, man, I should have said something. I knew something was up. I went through things. I needed to have my voice heard. And instead, I tucked my tail between my legs and I went back to the NFL when I knew a lot of this stuff was going on. And I don't know if he would be comfortable living with that. That's really the only thing that would make some reasonable sense to me. As far as others jumping in, I find it interesting, Greg, that already, Tony Dungy had that open letter to the NFL from last year. He kind of reposted it on Twitter and said that, other people have to get involved. We saw Hugh Jackson this morning say that when he was coaching the Browns gave him a little bit of extra scuttle to lose games. And that he thought, it was very similar to what Ross was doing with Flores down in Miami. So maybe Hugh Jackson. Yeah, and maybe Hugh Jackson jumps in on this. Jim Caldwell, as we know, people have questioned why he was let go by the Lions after a winning record. No matter how you feel about him as a head coach, I mean, he's the winningest head coach the Lions have had in a long time. Maybe he gets involved. So I do think there are going to be other people involved in this. Charles Robinson from Yahoo yesterday said that he already knew of 2 or 3 coaches that thought they had receipts that were similar to what Flores shared. So I do think others will get involved, which could make this even more messier.
Nick, let me say one thing on this. And Charles is an excellent reporter, and I'm sure we absolutely talked to guys who said this. But there's a big difference between talking anonymously to a reporter and saying like, oh, I see what's going on here. I also have receipts, and actually joining the class.
Right.
And,
I agree.
People can talk a big game, but when it comes out to actually doing this, it's quite another thing. So yes, is the potential there for 40, 50 minority coaching candidates in this league, former coaches, current assistant coaches, coming out, and some of them have text messages and other things and other evidence. And yes, that is possible. It's also possible it's just Brian Flores at the end of the day. And again, I keep going back to when you file something like this, you better have the terms of settlement in your mind ready right then. What
Right.
is going to satisfy you? What
Right.
is the change? I obviously the NFL system is broken. And in terms of how they're doing things, I do think the NFL has tried things. They expanded the Rooney Rule. They have incentivized teams developing minority coaches, assistant coaches, so that if they rise through the ranks to coordinator, general manager, what assistant general manager, and they get hired by another team, you pick up draft picks.
Right.
I,
Look,
you know,
there's
I'm
only one thing. Let me jump in. There's one thing
yeah,
about the NFL, because I agree with you as far as the Rooney Rule and the NFL. We can look at this and we can say 70% of the league is black. Right now, as we speak, there's one black head coach in the league. That's ridiculous. It's inexcusable. And for people saying, oh, well, what's the percentage supposed to be? More than one black head coach. I mean, if 70% of the league is black, you would imagine that the players who played in the league know more about the game than anybody else, right? So why is there such a differing percentage there, and the numbers are so slanted? It's crazy. It's not like that in the NBA, not even close. So they obviously have a problem. But I agree with you, Greg. I don't know what the NFL can do. Like, tangibly, what can the NFL do? They can't walk into facilities and put guns to the head of owners and say,
right.
make this higher. The only thing that I think the NFL can do, and which would start to change some of these things, and look, it's theoretically, because Shad Khan was brought in as an owner in Jacksonville, and everybody said, oh, well, there's a minority owner, and all Shad Khan has done is hire white head coaches, including Urban Meyer the last time around. So it's not going to be the end all be all. But the one thing the NFL could do is, moving forward, have a more concerted effort into bringing owners in from different backgrounds and minorities, black, brown, etc. That's the role the NFL can play. As far as day-to-day inside a franchise and the minutia, you can't tell an owner how to operate his business. It's just not going to work. He's going to inevitably hire the guy he wants to hire. No matter what Roger Goodell says, we say, it doesn't matter. So that's where it's going to start. It's going to start at the top, and it's going to start with some ownership changes.
I completely agree. And that's what I mean by, like, when you file a lawsuit like this, if you're Brian Flores, his attorneys, if they aren't just out for publicity, which you often get with these type of lawsuits, they need to tell him, all right, fine, you're going to do this. What are the terms of settlement that you are going to be satisfied in? You tell us, because basically that's what the NFL is going to do at the end of the day. They're going to say, Brian, what is going to make you satisfied that we don't go to discovery on this? Because what's the point in, possibly embarrassing a bunch of people in this league if we're not going to make real change with the NFL? What are the terms? How do you want to do it? I mean, I'm certainly open to hearing ideas on how to do it. I haven't heard any good ideas. But that's what you need to do. If you're bringing a lawsuit like this, you have to have the terms of settlement in mind that you're going to be satisfied with, and say, I effected change. I changed the NFL for the better and professional sports for the better, or else this is fruitless to me.
And this is a gigantic adventure, for Flores and his legal team to get to what you're talking about, right? It's going to be an adventure to get to that final, this is how we feel and what we want done, because, we're going to jump to Brady in a minute, but when you look at this idea of what can we do to change things, we have to first realize that this is something that's been ingrained for decades, much like throughout the country, hundreds of years, and things that happened hundreds of years ago, which just continue to affect, current life. It's the same thing in the NFL. You have generations of owners and their kids, and then they take over. You got, McNair down in Houston, who has no idea what the hell he's doing, but he gets the ownership because dad gave it to him. So you have the nepotism angle. Shad Khan, when he's gone, I'm sure it's going to go right to Tony Khan. He's going to own the Jags. Jerry Jones with Stephen Jones. So the problem is, how do you break that cycle? And when you have a situation like a Jerry Richardson in Carolina, maybe you shouldn't jump so fast to David Tepper and look at some other people, because those opportunities are few and far between in the NFL. And that also goes into coaching staffs. You look at the coaching. Andy Reid had his children on the staff. Belichick has his kids on the staff. And it kind of just, Kubiak and his children. It just kind of, that's how the system has worked for decades. And it's going to be very difficult to parachute in and make any kind of gigantic landscape change in a matter of a year or two. And it also goes down to the level of college and high school. College football doesn't have a ton of black head coaches. It all, many of the hires that are made right now are offensive coordinator positions, guys brought in, or, coordinators that are brought in to be the next head coaches. When you look at offensive coordinators, I think it was like 4 or 5 of the OCs this year were black. So if you're going from that pool, again, you're limiting the pool of black people that can rise up and be given the head coach slot. So it's a very layered, difficult, delicate thing. And I only hope that Flores and his representatives have an idea, like you said. The last thing I want to touch on with this is what you brought up with Belichick and how it's flimsy and how you think he can explain it away. Flores said that he has not spoken to Belichick since this came out, which is not surprising. It came out yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of position does this put Belichick in? Like, I know he can explain it away, but on the other hand, if he explains it away, that's not going to look good to black and brown coaches and people that he might be friends with. If he kind of poo-poos this thing and goes, nothing to see there, he might put himself in a very difficult position with certain people in the league. How do you think he's going to be able to kind of walk through this thing? And what is your best guess as to how he might handle it?
Well, I don't know how much of a precarious position it puts him in. I mean, because look, this is, we're talking about text messages. We've all screwed up in terms of, I got somebody mixed up. Nick, I probably sent you text messages that I'm, meant for my staffers at BSJ and other things. And, hopefully I didn't say I love you and smooches like I got my wife mixed up with you. But look, I don't think it puts in a precarious situation, because it's not, I don't think that does Belichick have the smoking gun inside of his mind that, yes, he talked to, like, who would he probably talk? He was probably talking to, he said he talked to somebody from the Bills, according to his text message, probably somebody from the Bills. Probably talked to Dayball. I don't think he really talks to anybody else on that staff. Maybe somebody in the front office like Brian Gain, who has some connections to the Patriots, sort of backdoor through the Giants. We talked to somebody from the Giants. Yeah, it could be the Maris, could be probably more likely Steve Tisch, who I think Belichick was a little bit closer with on the ownership side of the Giants. But, just looking at Bill's track record, his track record is to, when people think they have him in the crosshairs, that they can pin him down on something, he tiptoes through the raindrops. He knows how to maneuver. And in terms of, like, I'm sure he would say, look, I got somebody mixed up on the text messages. I don't even remember what I did last week, let alone 2 weeks ago with a text message. I was probably reacting off of, media reports. And also the the Giants had hired the Shane guy from the Bills to be the GM. Right. I was just connecting dots. I didn't really talk to anybody. I was talking out of my rear end. Like, he can do that. And I don't think he offends anybody. I think that's probably what's accurate. And, Bill's he's not going to reveal, like, oh yeah, I know the inner workings. I have sources with the Bills and the Giants, and I know their inner workings. So I don't think it's a big deal. I just wonder, it's never good to, look, Brian Flores put Bill Belichick on blast. It was basically the first line in this lawsuit that he used his text messages, screenshotted them. Bill's not going to react well to that. I don't see him having Brian having much of a future. I think there was a chance that he comes back as defensive coordinator or part of the staff if he didn't get a head coaching job. I think that's over now. Belichick might reach across the aisle and show he's the bigger person and hire him back, because he is a good coach. And quite frankly, the defense has never played better in recent years than under Brian Flores. But I don't think I don't worry about Bill Belichick. There's nobody's dodged more things in recent years than Bill Belichick without being tainted by them.